With alarming threats coming out of Iran, everyone is thinking, what will be? Should we be frightened? Will there be a larger war? Will America get involved? And how will it impact Israel? This isn't small questions because it affects not just that region, it affects the entire world. War in general, but especially a war in that part of the world because that has been a combustion chamber for the last decades for sure. But the truth is throughout history. And there's much that we can learn when we look back at history to help us make sense, to help us find strength, to help us find courage. So please join me as we talk about this imminent threat. Should we be afraid of Iran? How should we address the issues at hand? How should we look at it? How should the general world approach? And what can we actually do about it? Simon Jacobson here, and we will be speaking about should we be afraid of Iran. This program is in loving memory of Chaya Rachel Pele, Aleh HaShalom, upon her 16th yahrzeit on the 13th of Menachem Av. May her neshama have an aliyah, and in honor of the Stolik family, may they be well. Dedicated by Nathan and Allison Lustgarten. So with imminent threats coming out of that part of the world, namely Iran, and of course its proxies, the big question we're all asking is what's going to be? Will there be a larger war? Will America get involved? And should we be frightened? Should we be afraid? I mean, when a country like Iran that is well armed threatens, and it's not just a threat, we know a little while back they actually shot over 300 missiles and drones to Israel, and they are behind those proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis and all the others that they use to do their dirty work. So it's not just an empty threat. And of course, these issues have been simmering, even more than simmering, for quite a while. It's not just the assassination of the leader of Hamas or the assassination of one of the major commanders of Hezbollah. It's ongoing. It's not due to some one act. There's a fundamental hatred and call for the, God forbid, the destruction of the Jewish land, the Jewish people, and Israel, as Iran has clearly stated. It's dictated in the constitution of Hamas, so should anyone think that these are just words, it's actually part of policy. It's like a declaration of war. And now it's come to a point where in the last week or two, the threats are, we will attack, full attack, all the different expressions. So let me begin with fear itself. What is fear? Should we be afraid? Should we not be afraid? There's a big difference between fear and being prudent. When you lock your doors at night, when you hire police or other security to protect your property or protect your business, it doesn't mean you're trembling in fear and you can't function. It doesn't mean you're cowering in fear. It's part of your strength. It's to do what it takes to protect yourself, your family, your business, your life, from threats, from enemies. So the fact that we react to something, or we are proactive and we take the offense, doesn't necessarily mean that we're coming from weakness. And that's a critical difference in life in general. That our lives should not be driven by fear, it should be driven by strength. Strength includes doing whatever it takes to preempt or to protect against enemies, against anything that threatens us. So how does a person achieve a place that they don't get frightened, they're not afraid? I mentioned this in the past a few months ago, on the front lines with the IDF, right near Gaza. I spent an evening there, speaking for these young soldiers, these 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds, ready to go in to protect their innocent brothers and sisters of Israel against the enemy, which again has proven itself to be a true enemy. What you pick up by osmosis when you're around these young soldiers is tremendous amount of conviction, courage, and even joy. Now, nobody's happy and celebrating putting their lives on the line. But when you're committed to a cause that's greater than the fears involved, it gives you the ability to forge ahead. And that's what I felt. A certain innocence on one hand, but also a certain fortitude and vigilance and commitment that they would never back down. And that's only possible when you really believe in what you're doing. So in other words, the counterforce to fear, ultimately, is that you have something that's even deeper, that's also visceral and primal, that connects you to something greater, that helps you transcend your fears. And when you think about it psychologically, this is true across the board. I don't want to compare it to something as frivolous as sports. But the same idea, when you see trained athletes, even though they're in a situation of tremendous pressure, and they're able to maintain their composure, it comes down to their experience. And their confidence is stronger than the concerns of the moment. In spiritual Jewish thinking, there's an expression in Yiddish that says, when you're bound above, you don't fall below. Based on a story of an individual. His name was Meir Primishlan. So he visited a city, for a little town, for a Shabbat, and he wanted to go to the ritual bath, the mikveh, before the Shabbos. But it was a cold winter day, and the frost froze the mountains. With this mikveh, this ritual bath was at the bottom of a very slippery slope. So they told him that the townspeople, that people don't go to the mikveh during the winter, especially when it's so slippery, because it's dangerous. He insisted, and even though he was not a young man, he went. Two skeptics wanted to see what's going to happen. Is he going to perform a miracle? So they followed him. They barely could make it, but they saw that he walked down the slippery slope without any issue at all. Went into the ritual bath, came back, all intact. They, on the other hand, one of them broke a foot, one of them slipped. So Friday night they came over to him, they said, how did you manage walking down that slippery slope? He said, when you're tied above, you don't fall below. And what does that mean? It's like anything in life. When you go into a situation that may be dangerous, or maybe frightening. So if you go all alone, without resources, without tools, without confidence, of course, it can be very daunting and could hold you back. But when you know you're going with the support of others, and you know someone's holding you up, or there's a backup plan, so to speak, someone with a life raft, or in this case, someone like holding you up, you're tied above, spiritually speaking, through faith, through trust, to a transcendent higher consciousness, that's what gives you strength to go through even the dangerous twists and turns of life, the slippery slopes. And that's what I sensed when I was with those soldiers. Take Vietnam, by contrast, a small bamboo country, not just a third world country, completely inferior to the mighty and of the strongest army in history, the United States. And look what happened. Because the military, the U.S. military, did not know why they're fighting. They were sent there. There was no cause. There was no passion. So you can have the mightiest army with all the weapons and all the artillery. But if you don't have the heart and soul in there, the Vietnamese, on the other hand, were fighting for their own very towns, their villages, their people. I understand it's not the only factor, but it's one of the big lessons you learn. So the first and foremost thing that we all need to announce and declare is the following. No, we are not afraid of Iran. Nor are we afraid of our other enemies, because we don't go alone. We go with the strength of our ancestors. We go with the strength of God. As in some of the beautiful prophecies, it states we don't fight. Our strength is not just with armies and with weapons and with the military, but with spirit, with the power of spirit. Obviously, we also need a military. We need to have all the tools and resources. But above all, you need to have the spirit. You need to know that you're standing for the right cause. Point number 2, this is not the first time. That doesn't mean it's less of a challenge, but it means we've been here. We're highly experienced. We've been through it all. And I'll just list quickly, beginning from the Egyptians. I would even go earlier back to the time of Abraham, but let's start with the Egyptians. The first documented genocide, Holocaust, if you wish. Bondage, slavery, story of Exodus, the Egyptians, later the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Persians. The Romans, the Ottomans, the Byzantines, maybe in the reverse order. You name it throughout history. And of course, in the last century, we have the Holocaust, and before that, the Germans, and before that, the pogroms and the Inquisitions and the Crusaders. Where are they today? All gone. No remnant, no trace. And the Jewish people are here, and Israel is here. And all these wars have been fought over Israel and over Jerusalem. And the temple was destroyed. A second temple as well. First by the Babylonians and then by the Romans. But we are standing. Yes, we've been injured. We may be limping along. But we're here strong. So Iran, or ancient, or what's called Persia, is not the first. These are critical points to keep in mind, not just because of history, because that's what builds the fortitude, that's what builds that resolve and the confidence that we shall prevail. So fear is not the right word to use at all. No, we should not be afraid of Iran. However, prudent we need to be, because they are sworn enemies. So I want to address now not just the threats, but where does it come from? This is like the big question that actually very few people talk about. The root of it all. So some say it's because of the war in Gaza. No, it's the other way around. The war in Gaza is because of Iran and because of its proxies. A type of persistent war against Israel and stating clearly their goals. Whether it's called from the river to the sea, or other cliches, I don't want to use that word, or other declarations. So what is bothering them? What is it about the land of Israel? What is it about the Jewish people that bothers them? So this takes us back again to history. What bothered the Greeks? What bothered the Romans? What bothered the Egyptians? What bothered the Babylonians, the Persians, and all the others? So without going into a long analysis of anti-Semitism and Jew hatred, suffice it to say that the Jews represent something very clearly in history. In the words of one of the prophets, You are my witnesses. The Jewish people are witnesses, the witnesses to divine intervention in this world. You could say to the divine plan in this world. Witnesses, starting from Abraham, who became the father of all nations, actually. Many of these empires, if not all of them, originate from Abraham or Abraham's children. The Romans clearly trace their lineage to Esau, Abraham's grandson, the son of Isaac, whose grandson was called Rami. The Arab and later Muslim world traced their roots to Yishmael, the son of Abraham, and all the branches that come from there. And what did Abraham represent? A man in search of God, a man in search of purpose, a man in search of virtue, came to the determination, came to the clarity that this world is not created for our needs, our power and our vanity and our control, but to serve and transform this material world into a beautiful home and the garden for the divine. And he taught that to his children. And the children that embraced it and perpetuated it became the Jewish people. Ultimately, it would affect all the children of Abraham. And hence you have the birth of Christianity. And then 7 centuries later, the birth of Islam. Its principles based on Jewish ideas, but yet, as we know, firstly, the history of Christianity, quite violent. Beginning once Rome embraced Christianity, and then its heirs, and then, of course, Islam. Christianity has been tamed over the years. Today you have a country like the United States that has become a haven for all free people, including the Jewish people, instead of a persecutor. And our hope and prayer and belief, and absolute belief, is that the Muslims will also become that. Maybe some have become already, but the majority will become that, including Persia, including Iran. But clearly their time is not yet. There's still wars to be fought. Not in our choice. This is something that needs to be emphasized time and again. If our enemies would lay down their arms and no longer use violence or attacks and declare peace, that we do not want the destruction of Israel. We want to live side by side with you. What do you think would happen? Overnight, you wouldn't even need to declare it. They call it a ceasefire. It actually irks me every time I hear it. More than irks. Ceasefire. As if there's two sides here. You don't need ceasefire. You just need to become civil and declare peace instead of war. Instead of making it sound like there's some type of moral equivalence here. That's how a ceasefire happens. Inevitably. Instead of calling for a ceasefire, just stop calling for the destruction of Israel and stop acting that way. So the very statement itself is already a PR distortion, if you think about it. And we need to be very clear about it, because when we become ambiguous, or we even succumb to believing that false narrative, what do you think happens? You feed the cancer. So the war is also over our minds and our attitudes and our viewpoints. The story really is a religious war. It's a religious war. And Israel is considered by Muslim fundamentalists as sacrilegious, as a desecration of God, who chose the Muslims. So even one sliver of land, 1 inch, is already too much. That needs to change through the re-education of the Muslim world, the re-education of Iranians. I would even submit, based on my, we'll call it casual or superficial reading, or maybe a little more than superficial, that most Iranians are actually not approving of the religious fundamentalist approach. And has a lot more to do with many other factors at work. But the United States plays a key role, because the United States right now is basically leaderless and spineless. The United States stood up for the values that this country stands for. It's not about being pro-Israel, it's about being pro-free, being against violence, against war, allowing exactly what the United States was based on. Just like Christianity should not threaten and terrorize the world, so too Islam shouldn't, wherever it comes from. That's what the United States should be standing for. But that's up to, what shall I say? Hopefully a leader will rise that will be able to state that clearly and act on it. So we're dealing with actually a global issue here. Talk about clash of civilizations. It's even beyond that, because we're talking about history here. And of course, Israel stands right at the forefront, at the juncture, both historically and also geographically. So to bring it back to our key theme is, should we be afraid of Iran? The answer is absolutely no. Should we be strong? Absolutely. It's the only way to deal with this part of the world. It's the only way to deal with criminals. The only way to deal with people who are violent, who have threatened and actually acted on their violent intentions. Should it be an offense versus a defense? That's a strategic question. Very likely, yes. Sometimes the best defense is offense. And all of that adds up to, point being, that we're not on the defense in the sense we're waiting for something to happen. We have to be smart, be proactive, be preemptive, both physically, militarily, and psychologically. This is the key message. I wish there were leaders that would get up and say it unabashedly. But unfortunately, we live in a world of pandering, of politics, of polls, or just in general, lack of vision. A lack of a vision. There were some talks. Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke before the in Congress, and there were definitely glimmers and points that I consider to be valiant and legitimate, and I'm proud of to hear. This has nothing to do with him personally, this personal attacks. Think of the themes involved here. Forget the person here. But it's not enough. It's too little. And too few, and too in between. That's a call to our leaders. But to each of us, we need to do our part, because we also believe firmly, and this has been a big part of every war as well, that the entire universe, a microcosm, is within you. Where does heaven meet earth? At your doorstep, in your home, in your life. That we need to find our clarity within ourselves and our families. Because at the end of the day, the population of this world is essentially individuals like ourselves. So we need to be strong and resolute in our beliefs, in our faith and trust. Push and demand moral clarity from our leaders, starting with our community leaders and extending outward, and acting on it. Because the spiritual war is just as important as the physical war. The spiritual war means a war of virtue, of unity versus divisiveness, of doing that and achieving that in your home, in your family, in your community, wherever possible. And that has a ripple effect. I'm talking about what each of us is capable of. We're not just sitting ducks, so to speak, and waiting for things to happen. We need to make things happen. That's what a time like this calls for. When there are threats out there, the words of Maimonides, when something happens, it's never an accident. It would be cruel to say it just happened. It's all a wake-up call for each of us, individually and collectively. And as Maimonides as well says, and one good act, and one good word, and one good thought tips the scales and brings personal and global redemption. May we merit to see this immediately, and just by the mere fact that we commit, may that energy flow forward in a butterfly effect, a ripple effect that transforms the entire world. May God protect Israel. May God protect all innocent men and women and children, wherever they may be. Protect the Jewish people from all attacks, from all threats. Eliminate the enemy once and for all. May we do our part, as I said, both on the physical and on the spiritual level. And may all this be now. The timing couldn't be more appropriate as we go from the saddest day in the calendar, Tisha B'Av, yesterday, which signifies the destruction of the temples by Babylon and Rome, and all forms of destruction, leading us into a rebirth to the point where we come to the full moon of this month, that the Talmud calls the greatest holiday, together with Yom Kippur, because it's transformation of darkness into light and sadness into joy. May that be now, immediately, with a personal and global redemption. Thank you so much. This has been Simon Jacobson. MeaningfulLife.com is our website where you can find this and many other materials. Please subscribe to our offerings, to our YouTube channel, and please share. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, feedbacks, and comments. Be well and be blessed.
This program is brought to you by the Meaningful Life Center. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at meaningfullife.com/donate.